What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Very excited about today's video, man. As we're going to be breaking down the Steelers' defensive scheme under Mike Tomlin. Joining me is a very special guest, coach, author, and founder of MatchQuarters.com, Mr. Cody Alexander himself. One of the absolute best football minds that I've come across over the years, man, and someone that's really super passionate about the game and looks at it kind of through a similar lens as me. So I'm incredibly pumped to have him on. Without further ado, Cody, how you doing, man? Appreciate you jumping
Doing
on with
great.
me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's definitely there's a lot to talk about. Try to keep things fresh. We got 6 weeks until the next Steelers practice and training camp opens up. So I think this is the best time of year to do some like really deep dives and kind of look at things from a schematic approach, get you guys ready for the training camp, season, regular season, preseason, all that stuff. Just before we get started, if y'all do me a favor, man, just jump in there, like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop me a comment. All that stuff helps me out tremendously, helps grow the channel. But let's kind of jump into this thing, man. Like just from the start of it, what would you say is like the foundation of Mike Tomlin's defense, whether it be from like a coverage or a structure standpoint, when you've kind of been studying them over the past couple of months?
Yeah, so this is going to be a 5 down front. They're typically going to send 5. That's why too they will always have a high blitz rate. That's why you always want to make sure when you look at blitz rates, or if you see like media people putting out blitz statistics, make sure that you understand the Steelers are always going to be high because they have a 5-man predominant defensive line. They do play nickel. They will play nickel, but for the most part, this is going to be a 3-4 defense, going to have 5 guys on the front. They're going to be very heavily into single coverage. And then obviously with Tomlin's background, the changeup or the curveball for the defense is going to be those Tampa 2s, which he's kind of modified into what we call non-traditional Tampa. So this isn't your old school. I say old, and it was only like 20 years ago, but this isn't like old school Tampa where the mic's just running through the middle of the field. There's multiple different ways. And that's really one of the things that is kind of really cool about what Tomlin has done with this defense is that he's updated that part of it. There's not really much that you can do with cover 3. Cover 1 is cover 1. It's cat coverage. You got that dude. If you can't take that dude, then we're screwed anyway type deal. So, the Tampa stuff is really where they're able to kind of leverage some of the usage that they have in single high. But in the end, this is a dog rush cover 1 defense where they're going to send 5. They're going to let those guys get after the quarterback. And then we're going to play some man coverage or cover 3 behind that.
Yeah, I think you just look at some of the rates. The Steelers are pretty much always going to be somewhere in the top 10, and blitz numbers can be a little bit deceptive. I pretty much categorize blitzes as anything over 5 or more. But it does kind of depend on like what sites you look at. Blitzes can come off forms and fashions and all that stuff, but you just look at some of the numbers last year, man. Like they were very, very middle field close heavy. Like they played a 1 high shell on the 6th highest usage rate in the NFL, over 50%. So I mean that's just kind of what they're going to do. They're going to try to stack the box, get that extra man down there to help stop the run, 5-man front. You brought up a good point just in terms of like being a single high team, playing a lot of cover 1, playing a lot of cover 3. You brought up like kind of the cat coverage, cover 1, you're going to need to have guys on the boundary that are comfortable, playing on an island out there, winning their one-on-one matchups. But particularly with cover 3, because it is still the NFL's most used coverage. Like if you're going to play this style of ball that the Steelers want to play, what type of players do you kind of need to make sure that this scheme is, successful?
I think you need to have a mixed bag. I think you tweeted this morning about what coach talking about Terrell Austin talking about Dante Jackson and kind of like how he's more off-ball guy, Porter's an on-ball. Well, who are the other guys that run a lot of cover 1? You go look at the Browns, you go look at the Cowboys. Well, the Browns have a guy that can play off-ball, and they got a guy that can play on-ball. You look at the Cowboys with, Diggs obviously got hurt this year, but Diggs is an on-ball corner. A lot of people don't really understand. Deron Bland is an off-ball corner. He does not press. He's like lower than 20% press rate. So you want to have like a guy who's kind of your dog, right? That's going to get up in the grill of the receiver. He's going to be able to play bump man, kind of that traditional, what we think of when we think of NFL corner, right? Then you need to have a guy that on the other side that can play a little bit more off ball. So you were talking about boundary, like your press guy typically is going to be locked up. You're going to have him to the boundary. You're going to force the offense to essentially run slants and fades. So we can work on that. That's easy all day. And probably one of the best one, the guy, he's in Pittsburgh right now, is Pat Narduzzi. Why does he run press quarters? Why does he press his corners? He'll tell you straight up, because we get two routes out of it. We're going to get slants. We're going to get fades. I can work that. So if I can eliminate route combinations, then I know right now that I can kind of make it predictable. And now on the other side, you need to have a guy that can play off ball, that can be a little bit more varied in his approach, that can play kind of a little bit more loose. And so that way you have that to the field. The field has more space. That's usually where you want your more off ball guy to go. And so that to me is kind of how you need to build a room. You need to have an on ball guy and an off ball guy. And that's not saying that, you don't want to have a guy that's never pressed, but you want to be able to kind of have not everything is constantly pressed, because that's such a tough spot to be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I know, like with your coaching background, you've talked a lot about like over the years, just making sure your cornerbacks are comfortable, and that was one of the things I really appreciated about their approach with Joey Porter last year. He comes out of Penn State. They put him into the lineup, shortly after the season begins. But with Porter and his background, he has a freakishly long wingspan, getting him and at the line of scrimmage and allowing him to disrupt the release of the receiver. And like you said, a lot of these, offensive schemes and playbooks, like if you press, like one of the more common adjustments you're going to get is like, you're going to fade burst press. Like that's is what it is. And, eliminating the route tree does do a lot of really good things for the defense, because you can, kind of make them be a little bit more predictable. With Jackson, I think, coming out of Carolina, some of his best moments, in my opinion, were coming from off the ball. He's a guy who can backpedal really good, really fluid feet. His eyes can get him in trouble sometimes, but I do think there's some advantages, because I think of defense as like, it's really reactionary by nature, but, giving yourself multiple different stylistic, standpoints from a coverage standpoint is going to allow you to have more of the answers to the test. And I think that that's really important when you're wanting to play single high, because, you're going to have those dudes out there on the boundary with very little help. Of course, the Steelers have a really good pass rush. That's kind of where they want to win anyway. But, you mentioned some of the NTTs, the non-traditional Tampas. I've really enjoyed, kind of watching some of how they've been using. I feel like over the last several years with Terrell Austin kind of in the fold, and him and Mike Tomlin kind of working in tandem. I've really enjoyed the way that they've, used more pre-snap disguise, and it feels like that's kind of one of the ways the NFL is trending anyway. But how do you think those Tampa 2 looks kind of function as counters to their primary coverages?
Yeah, so it's the illusion of single high pre-snap. And so what you're able to do in a lot of these NTTs is you're able to kind of disguise what you're going to do. So offensive coordinators are coming in. You have the Steelers, who are running almost 70% middle of the field closed, which, again, outside of the Browns and the Cowboys, is probably the highest amount.
Right.
So when they're building, and here's the other thing. I don't know. There was a video the other day of Jesse Minter, who is the defense coordinator at the Chargers. And they were asking him about what's the biggest difference between college and the NFL. And a lot of times at the college level, we're talking about 85 to 90 plays a game, right? So you have a lot of what are called like throwaway plays. It doesn't really matter. You can just throw that play away. It didn't work. Okay, we'll go to the next one. And so what you end up doing at the college level is you get a lot of volume, right? So there's a volume of plays. Let's just see if it works. If it busts, who cares? We got another play coming after it. At the NFL, these call sheets are very curated. You only get about 60 plays a game. So you want to make sure every time you're calling a play that thing's working. So what you do as a defense, because you are reactionary, how can you kind of change the math in your favor? And it's by giving that illusion of, hey, we're going to be a single high defense. Our curveball is going to be that, maybe once every 5 plays or on certain downs, we're just going to throw a trap 2 in there, right? We're going to throw an NTT and non-traditional Tampa. Now, a non-traditional Tampa, the nice thing about being a cover 3 team is that Tampa coverage really is quasi cover 3. It really is. It's just, yes, you have the split field safeties and they're working to the deep half, but you have that middle pole runner. He's just coming low to high. Now, what can happen in these is you have what's called a whiteboard coverage, meaning that you literally just draw Tampa 2 with X's on a board. You can then take guys and move them around. That's why it's great as a complement to any kind of simulated pressure, meaning that you're showing 5 or more, but you're only rushing 4, or just changing the look post snap. We're going to give you a cover 1 look, and then we're going to roll to it. Now, these are all, if you actually go through like a Dick LeBeau playbook, you are going to find a lot of like post snap movements from single high to cover 2. They're just 5-man pressures. So now you get the simulated pressure element of that. We're really only going to do a 4-man rush. We're changing the math on the back end. So these NFL coordinators are coming in and they're saying, okay, our list of plays is going to defeat cover 3 or defeat cover 1. And then all of a sudden you get a cover 2 zone. Well, now our play doesn't work into that. And that's where that changeup comes in. Remember, if you're a fastball pitcher, right, to take it to baseball, you have to have an off-speed pitch with it to get that batter. Because otherwise that batter's just going to be sitting on that fastball. All of a sudden you throw that changeup or you throw some sort of off-speed pitch, and now he's swinging, right? Or he's just staring at it. So that's kind of what we want when we run non-traditional Tampas. We want that quarterback to have to work through. We don't want the offensive coordinator who has the eye in the sky to be calling the plays. We want the quarterback in real time when, TJ Watt's screaming down your throat, that he's got to make a decision. He's got to figure out. And you're usually going to default to what you're anchored in, right? Which is, they're running single high. Next thing I know, boom, now it's not single high.
Yeah, I think you made a good point too. Like putting the pressure on the quarterback and those post snap rotations. Pre snap. There's depending on the scheme, you may have a man beater on one side, you may have a zone beater on the other side. So you may have like some pure progression stuff. But the guy, the quarterback's going to look at the shell of the defense, and that's going to determine where his eyes start. Now, if you're changing the picture for him, that's going to put more work on the quarterback. When he's got those really good pass rushers coming back for him. So I know we talked a lot about like the non-traditional Tampa stuff, just in a different form, like on my channel with the film study stuff. But I know Cody just put up a recent article. I'll link that in particular to the description of the video as well. But one of the things I like about, the NTTs is you can use whoever you want as the pole runner. Like you can bring the pole runner from depth. They just brought back Cameron Sutton, a guy who was with the Steelers a couple years, like 2 years ago. But, one of the things he did early in his career, he was kind of the down backer. He's played some nickel. He's played some outside. He's played a little bit of safety. So they did the same thing with Patrick Peterson last year, like having really smart players that can do different things. They can play in the deep half. They can run the pole. They can play on the outside. It allows you to be more flexible in those kind of whiteboard coverages that you mentioned. It just make all of it's just really about keeping, I feel like, the offense on their toes and being unpredictable. And like that's one of the easiest ways to kind of keep your head above water. I feel like in the NFL on defense. When you were studying the Steelers defense, over the last several months or whatever, was there a particular game plan that you liked the most that you saw?
I thought their first game against the Ravens was really, really good. I mean, to me, they had simulated pressures they were attacking the edges, because one of the things that you don't want is you don't want Lamar Jackson to step up. You drain your coverage out with cover 1, and then now you're a man short in the box, and now you're going to screw yourself, right? Because like that's the thing is everybody kind of defaults as like, oh, he's just a running back who can throw, and that's really not the case. Like he's really talented at throwing. It's just, but he's one of those too because of his athleticism. You want to kind of keep him in a box. I thought they did a really good job of like changing their leverage on their 5-man fronts to not give the Ravens, because the Ravens run a lot of gap scheme. They just kind of always have. Yeah. So you in a 5-man front, you're kind of already giving them kind of angles. And so changing where the nose is going to go, switching up how kind of playing more of shades instead of more head up stuff. I thought that was really good. They did their drop 8 Tampas. Basically, hey, look, we're going to make you play. We're going to make you go through your progressions. Right. And that's not even really a knock on Lamar. It's really more of we're going to force you to be a quarterback, right? We're going to force you to be Joe Burrow. That's what we're going to make you do. We're going to make you sit back there, pat the ball, and we're not going to just let you kind of go wherever you want. We're not going to flush you out. We're not going to pressure you. We're going to kind of be a little bit more passive. And what you end up getting with is, again, the Ravens skill position guys are really hit or miss on every week. And so what you get is that mix of man, match, zone. And then we're also not putting a lot of pressure. You're going to have to throw into windows. Your receivers are going to have to compete. They're going to have to get open. And so that to me was one of the better games that they had defensively. I thought it was really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned like with the skill position players, man, his receivers did him absolutely dirty that week. They had so many drops. He had over, I think, 100 air yards dropped through the air. But you mentioned just like the way that they were, they've had a lot of success against Lamar. They've only seen him a couple times just because of injuries, rest, whatever. But they've been one of the few defenses that have really been able to kind of quote unquote figure him out, over the years. And I think that their approach really speaks volumes. And I think it kind of highlighted some of the stuff that I felt like teams kind of wanted to copy a little bit as the season went on. You look at like blitz rate, they blitzed over 50% of the snaps against Lamar. And I think, when you're a single high team, when you want to play that, man coverage, cover three, people can kind of get a little bit scared away from like, oh, well, what if we blitz and he breaks the pocket? Well, you just have to be really dedicated in your rush lanes. You got to make sure that you are boxing him in. You got to make sure he doesn't get out of the pocket, but also don't allow him free escape lanes, through the A or the B gap. But, like you said, you can make him play quarterback, take away his athleticism, which is, as great as he is as a passer, you could take away his biggest athletic gift as a runner. So I definitely they've done some cool stuff over the years with him, man. Like one of the ways that they've you mentioned like they run a lot of gap and stuff, but they will mix in some like zone reads and power read stuff. One of the cool things that they'll do is pretty much every time they see him, they'll do what they call like charging the mesh. So basically,
Yes.
it's just like we're going to make you hand the ball off because the quarterback is going to be reading the in-man on line of scrimmage. We got a similar video coming up on the channel from a Steelers perspective about this, but we're going to make you, hand the football off, and we'll take our chances with like Gus Edwards. That's why a lot of their backs, like they end up averaging like 5 yards a carry. It's just because like, well, the defense isn't stupid enough to, let him keep the ball. We want to make these running backs keep it instead of him. So, but yeah, good stuff there for sure. Definitely like that was probably one of their bigger wins, I feel like last season. But you mentioned Dick LeBeau earlier, but like the fire zone stuff, I know we talk a lot about that like over the years. That stuff really goes back to like, I feel like Dom Capers probably predates that, honestly. But you mentioned like they were top 10 blitz rate last year, regardless of where you look. What are some of your favorite ways, that the Steelers kind of get after the quarterback?
Yeah, so really to hit on Dick LeBeau, the godfather of the fire zone is Bill Arnsparger. So this is the nameless defense, like the Killer Bees, like the 53 defense, like all of the Miami defenses in the 70s all come from this. So they call it like a replacement pressure where you send one guy one way, you drop the guy off the line the other way. That's the genesis. So what LeBeau added was, hey, what if we blitz the safety? What if we blitzed a corner, right? Because if you think of like old Steelers guys, it's all these DBs getting like 4 or 5 sacks. I mean, we got edges that are getting paid, $10 million a year, and they can't even get like 4 or 5 sacks, right? But you got these DBs that are able to do it, that are going all over the place. And so, really, what it is these were created as quote unquote safe pressures. So this is the predecessor to what we have now with like simulated pressures, or what are known as replacement pressures or creepers, right?
Right.
And so, some of the coolest things that I think that the Steelers are doing now is bringing back the defensive back pressure, like bringing back the safety pressure. So these are things, remember, there's really nothing new in football, but we've kind of gone away from blitzing the corner. And then you have guys like the Chiefs who do it almost like 20% of the time. They do it more than anybody. I know the Bills are pretty close. Now the Steelers don't necessarily blitz the corner like that, they have in the past, but blitzing the safety, especially against some of these teams that are like, let's get in 12 personnel. A lot of times that safety, when you stack him on top of a tight end, they're not necessarily worried about him in the run fit. They're thinking, okay, well, he's going to be tracking the tight end, or we can work him outside. There's different ways to do it. And then all of a sudden he goes through, he's getting a run through an open gap. And that's actually one of the basis for one of the articles I wrote about the Steelers was like their safety pressures, especially against the 49ers, I thought were really good. We're attacking the B gap, knowing when to attack the B gap, when to attack the edge, how to attack a protection, how to attack the run schemes. I thought were really good. And I think we're going to see more of that. So like, I think the Steelers are back on trend in terms of, we're already a single high defense. let's
Yeah.
use those guys. I think, you look at guys like even with Schwartz with the Browns, for instance, they don't really blitz the safety a ton. They will, but it's not a big part of what they do because they want to run a lot of man coverage. So I
Right.
think that to me right now is where defenses are trying to figure out. If you run a lot of zone, which the Steelers do, they run a lot of cover 3. They use cover 1 more or less, probably like on third and middle or like these kind of middle downs. But if I'm going to put a guy down there, I need to use him in the blitz game. Otherwise, you're never going to honor him. You know what I mean? And so to
Right.
me, I think that's kind of one of the things from Dick LeBeau and the Dom Capers Street, which, by the way, all came from the 1989 Saints with
Yes.
Jim Mora.
Okay, yeah, you're right. Yeah, I think that too. Like, if you're gonna stack the box like that, you got to be able to, like, again, it's just a matter of how many different punches can you throw, how many
Right.
different guys or different. I think from a protection standpoint too, you mentioned like just manipulating the way that teams want to pass protect, and like that's a big thing because one of the things too with all these play action heavy schemes, like if you listen to coaches talk or like just in a lot of these clinics, especially from like the Shanahan tree, they really want to make sure that they are limiting their tackles, in particular, exposure to true pass sets. Like that's
Right.
the name of the game when you're seeing all these play action heavy offenses. But blitzing the safety, using your defensive backs is a good way to kind of throw counters into that. I do want to ask you this too, because like you wrote about this a little bit. We talked about it, I think like a week or two ago on Twitter, but the Steelers just hired Arthur Smith as their offensive coordinator, a heavy wide zone guy. Me and Bobby Peters talked about this last week. You are seeing some teams go away a little bit, like from the Shanahan tree, go away a little bit from wide zone, shift back into more like gap or power. But I know you have recently wrote an article. You mentioned Jesse Minter earlier. I think that
Yeah.
was one of the examples of blitzing the edge to kind of help
Yep.
attack the edge and stop that wide zone stuff. Can you talk a little bit about like how NFL teams have kind of adapted to wide zone and then the bootleg kind of counter off of that?
Yeah, so really to go with a Shanahan tree guy, you go look at what Mike McDaniels is trying to do with the Dolphins, and you get all the crack tosses, the seal
Hmm.
tosses, the seal stretch. I mean, there's a million different ways to do it. Pin and pole. When you go, and we've already seen this iteration at the college level, just a little bit of a different environment. But when you go to these odd fronts, you give the angle for the gap scheme. So that's why we're seeing more and more guys go away from it. So 5 down fronts, you have 2 solid edges. You're basically keeping everything in the box. That's why we're seeing more inside zone or more just like straight up A gap attacking, almost kind of like these man dive schemes.
Hmm.
And then on top of that, going back more toward a power game. I think the Rams are a great example of like
Yep.
shifting more towards a power game, going back to more counters, more powers. And again, it goes down to angles. So you're essentially if you run a bunch of like zone, you're going to get more even front stuff. And so what do teams do for that? So what do all the even teams get? They get trapped. So that's the cat and mouse game that you have on defense. And you kind of hit it. And if you were going to ask me what's kind of the one way that teams are able to kind of counteract these wide zones, and it's edge pressure. So, yeah, we may have a 5 down front, but getting these guys moving, I call it, and it's 2 ways. You have 2 types of movement, right? But if I send a guy off the edge, I'm getting a DB who's either can chase something down or he can climb, he can tackle the quarterback on a boot action, or he can climb to it. When we cross face of offensive linemen, right? So if we're going, I call this force motion. So we're going against the grain of the blocking. If you do that, a lot of times you can get that offensive lineman to grab, or
Hmm.
he hesitates, right? It's the flinch effect. Okay. So he'll hesitate. Well, then that little slight hesitation allows my guy to come off clean. If he grabs him, I'm shortening the edge. Even then, what we can do off of that is what is called a ricochet technique. So I don't want to get double zone. I mean, I don't want 2 guys crossing my face. So it's not a long stick. I'm gonna rip inside. If the tackle scoop blocks to get the guy outside, I'm going to hit the shoulder of the guard, almost picking him and then getting vertical. And so we're getting multiple actions of doing this. So I'm setting the edge. I'm getting the pick. Well, if the running back overplays me, I have leverage now on the inside lineman. So the guard or the center, like I have like leverage on him. Now I just ricochet back off. I just go tack the running back. And so
Right.
that's where you've seen really a lot of teams are starting to shift towards, like, if you watch like teams that like Detroit, like everybody runs Penny, which is 5-1 against them, right? So the 5-man front, solo backer, they're going to have 5 because they run so much 11 personnel stuff, even when they have 12 personnel, because Laporta is essentially just like
a wide
a
receiver.
receiver. And so what you get, and a lot of times now, it's forcing the offense to be more varied. And so you can't, just like on defense, you can't just be a one-trick pony. We can't just run wide zone with boot, right? We're going to have to add a gap scheme element. We're going to have to add this into it. And so to me, that's where the edge pressure really is sealing it. But it's more than anything, it's the internal line movement that's really messing with the blocking. And to counter that, if it's run away from me, we're feeding into that. So I'm feeding into that. You're having to hold me there, so you can't climb vertically to get to the backer. So it's all about keeping the second level clean, and it's all about just boxing everything in and really forcing those inside linemen to work.
Yeah, you brought up a good point too, like just with the, because I've studied a ton of Arthur Smith tape, like even going back to his like Titans days, but really just looking at Atlanta as well. Like the number one thing that I keep like coming back to is in terms of like what's giving them problems, especially last year when they weren't as effective running the ball, is like line movement.
Yep.
Like you get those stunts, or just like slants in general. You do leave yourself a little bit susceptible to big plays if guys aren't gap, assignment sound. You're not gapped out necessarily, but it does cause so much disruption and confusion, I feel like, for the offensive line, because like and just like another thing too that I feel like I'm seeing a little bit more of is like movement right before the snap. So it just changes the picture for the offensive line on like, okay, I got this double, I got this reach, or I'm going to be able to climb to the second level, 10 seconds left on the play clock or whatever, and they shift the gap over. And like that kind of stuff too, I felt like was giving them a little bit of issues. And you're really talking about a lot of the stuff that we've talked about on the channel, right? Like I feel like from an offensive perspective, like we talk about defenses needing to have multiple counters depending on the scheme that you're going up against, the play call that you're going up against. From an offensive perspective, Arthur Smith's been really heavy, like wide zone. Like they don't have very much power or gap elements in their offense. Like they'll run a little bit of duo, but like they don't utilize pullers a lot. That's something that the Steelers do really well. It's something that I'm really looking forward to seeing how he reinvents himself as a coach in this next act, because I really think that it really starts with finding more of a gap element when teams want to play these 5-man fronts, want to get really creative and attacking the edge, the line movement, things like that, penny, whatever have you. But that's good stuff right there. It really kind of goes off a lot about what we talked about in last week's video. If you were to take one or two things that NFL offensive coordinators right now are doing, to really make life difficult, what would you say that those are?
It's the, motion has always kind of been around. We're starting to see a rebirth of motion at the NFL level the past 5 years. But I think even more now is just the man IDs, the coverage ID motions now. They're just getting so creative with it, whether if it's just, hey, let's get to the line of scrimmage. I'm just going to move you all the way across. Let's see if they bump or if they follow. So for defenses, what it's really doing is there's a lot of time during practice that you have to kind of get to where we have to understand, okay, are we moving? Okay, if we move, like for now, my outside corner is in a slot. So does he understand the slot? I think we are probably in a time of football. There's probably no better time in football of where if you're like an intellectual person and you just love like nuts and bolts stuff, like we're in it. Like that, offensively, you have to be multiple. Defensively, you have to be multiple. But it's not just the play calling; it's within the system of like, okay, we get a stack here. What's our stack check? Okay, because the Chiefs are really good about they coverage ID all the time just on the stack with Kelsey. They'll just walk them in. They'll see if you bring the safety down, fine, we'll just play off your leverage. And like the Mahomes and Kelsey are so good, they just know the leverage. Like you just get a vertical route to clear the corner out, and then they're just playing off leverage at safety. And so to me, that's really the key is like for offenses, I'm going to get your outside corner in the slot. I'm going to get your slot to have to play out. I'm going to have to get you guys to get your stack check or your bunch check in real time, right? We're going to use quick motion to get the eye candy on these linebackers. And so you really got to understand now, where am I in the coverage, right? It's not just, I got that guy. Because a lot of times when you play man, you're trying to make it look like zone now. If you're in zone, you're trying to make it look like man. And
Right.
those are things that these NFL coordinators are really working. These man ID. Okay, how can we mitigate a lot of the risk of these movements? How can we do this? Now, eventually, we'll get to a point where it becomes it's not novel anymore, and we'll kind of have an idea. But I really think now the offense has now put the onus back on the defense. Now the defense is guessing about
Right.
who's moving, who's coming back, and it's not just get an empty, bring the running back in. Like we've kind of moved past that.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned too, like it just goes back to what we were saying earlier. Their offenses are just trying to get the quarterback pre-snap information. That's
Yes.
really what it is. And you mentioned like some of the quick motions, like some of the push motions, like whatever the Dolphins are calling, they're
See,
like cheetah motion, like
yeah.
changing those fast motions and stuff. And really, like I feel like motion at the snap has really increased. Like I don't have the numbers necessarily between like regular motion and like motion at the snap, but like I feel like that's really increased over the last several years because like a lot of these teams, like if you're wanting to run these like split field coverages, keeping things in front, like I know I literally just finished your book match quarters on Amazon, and like that's something you talk about, like having to know the number.
Yep.
Is this guy 1, 2, or 3? You mentioned like how you're going to play stacks, how you're going to play these push or quick motions, because that's really what, like if you want to play like split field coverage or a lot of these uh bunch checks, whatever, like you have to know like who's who. Like, is this dude number
Yes.
one? Are we going to play him like he's number one? Are we playing him like he's number two? And all that stuff's like really important from a communication standpoint. And it just forces, everyone on the back end to be so locked into their assignment. But, if you had to pick, your most innovative defensive mind in the NFL right now, like if you had to narrow it down to like one or maybe two, like who would that be for you and why?
I think the obvious answer, and most people would go with Mike McDonald, and I think it's kind of a little bit his success, and you hear about it a lot of how he kind of redesigned the Ravens coaching tree, like the coaching system, like redesigned the playbook, kind of put things in families. These are all things that colleges and high school coaches have been doing forever, just because our football IQ you start going down the levels and it's not great, right? So how can I
Right.
teach this volume? I'm cycling players out every 4 years. And so all he did was he took a scheme that has really dominated football for the last 20 years, and he just said, hey, what if we just gave it a 2.0 update? Like, what if we just did some things? I think he's multiple with it, which I think it's hard. It's hard for them as the offense. It's hard for the offense to figure out what the defense is doing, but in terms of teaching, it's simple. I think a lot, like I mentioned earlier, these whiteboard coverages, these whiteboard alignments. There's a video everybody's kind of going over about, one of the guys for the
Leonard
Seahawks.
Williams.
Leonard Williams. He's got me from 0 all the way out to like a wide 5, and it's like, yeah, because all he's doing and really what he's talking about is like on these pressure packages of moving a guy around to get leverage. It's no different than what you see now. The Steelers, that's one thing that the Steelers don't do, probably where other defenses do a better job of, like taking TJ Watt, for instance, and not always lining him up in a wide 9.
Right.
Right. Like you see the Cowboys think they're clever. And I think it's really just to appease Michael Parsons of like, oh, we'll put you at off ball backer. But then like 70 to 80% of the time they're blitzing him in the B gap.
Right.
And it's really just we're attacking the guard, whether in the run game or the passing game. So to me, I think he does a really good job. I really enjoy watching what he does. I think a guy that does not get enough credit, and you got one of his corners, Dante Jackson, is Israel Evero.
Oh yeah.
I mean, people don't understand, like, he's put together some solid defenses. They were a top 10 defense when he was with the Broncos, with that whole mess that he was going through with, the end of it with Nathaniel Hackett. And then, he goes to Carolina, and they were a top half of the league defense. And you probably can't really name one guy on that defense. I mean,
Right.
so without just like a pure star and getting production, and then again, having kind of that futility on offense on the other side. So I think he's really taken that Fangio adjacent scheme. They do everything from a 2-high shell. So they're but they're still running predominantly cover 3, a lot of 5-man fronts. To me, they're kind of like kind of the updated version to what we see with the Steelers. Like if the Steelers were to transform and like, hey, let's give us a brand new fresh coat of paint, what would that look like? I think it would look more or less like what the Panthers are doing.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Like you mentioned, like with the Fangio stuff, and we can kind of hit on that real quick. But with the shift to like more too high stuff pre-snap, I think there is this idea that with the Fangio and all these like defensive coordinators have tried to replicate some of the success that he had, especially like early on, and some of the difficulties that he's given some of these better offenses. I think a lot of people just assume like, oh, it's too high, we're getting quarters. Like
Yeah.
quarters is still only run at about like 10% of defensive plays. It's really just it's holding the presentation and again making the quarterback do the work post snap. But you still get, even Fangio himself, like you mentioned, like he runs a ton of cover three. Like I think
Yes.
there's just that's a little bit of misconception there. But with this extreme emphasis that we've got right now, defenses, one to, I mean, not that they've never not wanted to take away explosive plays, but I feel like more than ever now we're getting these defenses that are so intent on taking away explosive plays, forcing check downs, that's put an emphasis on making sure you've got secondary players that can tackle. What do you envision as the next like counterpunch from NFL offenses?
It's going to go to 12 personnel, 21 personnel. I think we're already starting to see the trend. In fact, the NFL has a cyclical nature with it. I wrote about it in Hybrids about 5 years ago, just talking about how the evolution of the modern defense, how we've gotten to now these anti-spread defenses, a lot of zone coverage, running nickel, how our offense is going to do it. Well, we saw this. I mean, and the Steelers were one of the leaders in it in the 90s and early 2000s. We're going to pack it in. We're going to run power. It's 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Don't really care. You got Big Ben sitting back there, doing play action and these 7, sometimes 10 step drops and then just hucking and chucking because you got so many guys up there. Defense, Steelers again with their defense, you have these humongous, massive human beings up front, even at middle linebacker. No one really can run very well because you're just stopping it. Now, we are in the post-spread era. So do I see us going back to Neanderthal ball? No, not at all. I think offenses understand space. I think the NFL has, and I was talking to somebody about this the other day, like the NFL has now joined the NBA, the NHL, and soccer as a space sport.
Yep.
Right. It's everything now has been pushed to the edges. Everything now you have to be skilled. You have to be athletic. You have to be, you don't have there's no such thing as a box safety anymore. There's no such thing as a mic plugger anymore. There's no, Vince Wilfork right now, and he's an alien just in general, but like a guy that looks like Vince Wilfork right now would not be able to play in the
He's a
NFL.
day 3 pick. He's a day 3 pick.
He's a day 3 pick. He's a Hall of Fame nose guard in the era that he was, but now he's a one-down player. You may put him in there on first down. You may put him in there on goal line, but, can he pass rush? Now we've seen all the interior defensive linemen that are getting paid right now. What is the common denominator with it? And it's pass rush. It's not, can you stop the run? And I think you talked about it earlier with the Ravens about, the running backs are getting like 5 yards a carry. I'm telling you right now, and this is going to sound crazy because if you go to a Friday night or you watch your college team on Saturday and they're constantly getting 5-yard runs, you're pulling your hair out and you're calling for the DC's job, right? Oh, we can't stop the run. At the NFL level, you get a 5-yard run. Okay, whatever. You're going to throw the ball because it's 2nd and 5. Right. Yeah. Or, you're going to, if you get a 4-yard run at 2nd and 6, it's a passing down, and it's a passing league. That's why the quarterbacks are now, or they're all $500 million, whether they're good or not. So I think that to me is kind of like where the evolution is, and we hit on it with the Lions, like being able to get in 12 personnel, maybe even bringing in an extra tackle, but we're really playing 11 personnel schemes. Right. Yep. Like we're really trying to get you. And I think the Dolphins do a great job of that. The 49ers do a great job of like, hey, we're going to give you this presentation and you're going to go run base. And then Kittle's going to actually destroy whoever the linebacker is that you're trying to get him. In fact, Kittle, for whatever reason during the regular season, like he's basically like, if you just put tight ends and receivers together, like he breaks the charts too. Like he's like up him, and sometimes he's almost even better than Travis Kelce. So I think that's where we're getting at, is we're also starting to see more and more teams. I think, for instance, the Raiders are a great example of this. They have Maher, that's the online tight end, traditional tight end, right? He looks like the All-American tight end that everybody thinks of, right? Then you got Brock Bowers, who is your move guy. He can run, you can run fly sweep with him.
Whatever you want to, yeah.
You can line him up out wide. And so I think you're starting to see that evolution. And so it's changing. I think safeties will now start becoming more important. I thought the Patriots were ahead of the curve last year. Obviously, Belichick's not there, but having like 4 guys that literally can do anything.
Yeah, super valuable.
Right. You can mix and match hey, we really need a box guy. I think the Packers are a great example too. If you go and actually look at their draft, and who they drafted, and then the safeties that they have now, they have a guy that fits like every need. We have a box safety, we have a hybrid safety, we have a deep safety, and so that's kind of where we're at defensively is and also too, like, can my nickel corner tackle? Because if he can't,
Huge.
then it doesn't really matter. There are, we will have coverage corners that play slot, but more and more those guys now have to be kind of these half in, half out guys, like we've seen at the college level forever.
Yeah. And you mentioned too, like, with the early down nickel stuff, that's why the Steelers sometimes will, depending on the personnel or who they've got, like that's why they will sometimes mix and match. Like, this is the early down guy because this guy's gonna he's gonna sometimes have to be in the run fit. Sometimes we're definitely gonna need him to tackle. But you can't hide just like smaller corners that
Yeah.
don't like to tackle inside. It's just not a thing. But you mentioned too, like, I think we talked a little bit about earlier, just like this is the day and age of like where having really highly intelligent players pays off a ton because
Yes.
yes, like I feel like the day and age now, like coaches are doing a really good job of adapting. Okay, like this player, like you mentioned, the Pats, really good example of this. But like this player is really good at doing, this specific role. Like we've done a better job, I feel like, of not pigeonholing guys to doing things that they're not comfortable doing. But at the same time, like you mentioned, from an offensive perspective, where you can really quote unquote kind of break the code or break the game is like when you've got guys like Laporta that allow you to run your 11 personnel stuff out of 12
Yep.
personnel or a 6 offensive lineman set, and they can still function like a slot receiver or anything like that. And the same goes for the defensive stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If you can find a nickel that's really good in terms of like he can do everything, he can play man coverage, he can play early down, like he's a really good run defender. Brian Branch is a really good example for Detroit, but he's also like a really good pass specialist too. Those guys are the ones that really put your offense or defense really over the top, in my opinion. There's just not very many of them. But I think, like, last question I got for you, man. I know, we talked a lot about Lamar, but the Steelers are going to play a bunch of these running quarterbacks over the course of the season. And I kind of categorize quarterbacks a little bit differently. Like, not everybody's a running quarterbacks. We got a lot of mobile guys. You have to be able to move at the NFL level now. Like they're different, in my opinion. But like the two like kind of rushing quarterbacks that I think of, they're going to see Anthony Richardson, Jaden Daniels. They're going to see Jalen Hurts too. He's a little bit different of a player. But what are some of your ways, like best ways at the NFL level, to kind of slow down some of these, really athletic runners at the quarterback position?
Yeah, so typically what you would feel like we're kind of biased to hearing is, oh, well, you're going to play some quarters. You're going to get 4 down
Right.
front, maybe even 5 down front. You're going to play quarters. Problem with quarters at the NFL levels, quarters really a passing down coverage. The 9-man spacing quarters that we think of is like at the NFL, like, or at the college level, like again, what Pittsburgh runs with Narduzzi, that doesn't really exist. That's called cover zero, right? Like, So I think, to me, we're going to have to play single high coverage. How are we going to do that? A lot of times it comes with playing a cheat safety, basically tagging that middle safety to not just, this is not your old school Greg Williams safeties 20 yards deep and just
Not the
backpedaling
the
to oblivion.
deepest.
No, we're not doing, chast deep coverage that you probably
Yeah.
learned as in junior high and high school. Chast deep, that just doesn't exist anymore. And so I think I think zone coverage a lot of times is kind of the answer now, is like, we're not going to play cover 1 against Lamar Jackson, even if we feel like we can match up. 3 match really doesn't even get in it as well. So like where we're essentially like the old school Belichick, Saban, Ripley's match stuff. That's kind of, everybody kind of has an idea of what that is. Like essentially if everybody goes vertical, it turns into cover 1. Again, we don't want to run that. So I think spot drop zone match has really come back. I think that's why a lot of people really like the Fangio system too, is because it's not really match heavy unless it needs to be. They can kind of vary it. Mike McDonald's another great example of a guy that runs a lot of spot drop cover 3. I was talking to an NFL coach this offseason talking about, hey, this is the only level of football where you can run spot drop and just not get fired at some point. Like you can just run it on every down. You can run spot drop, whatever coverage it is. You can run Tampa, you can run country cover 3, you can run country cover 4, you can spot drop, and you probably are going to be fine. And you're like, well, why? But that's the evolution now. We're getting pure progression stuff. I think that's where, to me, that's where we're going to start seeing more guys are going to go to what's called like zone match, is so that we're going to match the guy in our zone. If he goes out, then we're just going to kind of zone off, get our eyes back. But that's how, again, with the quarterback you mentioned too, with charging the mesh, make him decide. That's it. And I didn't mention this when you were, because we went on to the next question, but like that's been around forever. All high school coaches in America are like, oh, you got a running quarterback? We will never let him carry the ball. We will always have some sort of a hold call or a charge call or an up call to where we will always give him a give read. And so then what you get is you get a guy, and Lamar does this too. He's just like, screw it, I'm running right here. And hopefully you have layers. I think that's the other thing too. Zone gives you the ability to have layers on your defense. So if the first level doesn't make it, I've got 2 guys on the back end that are then able inside and outside there. And then I have a cap defender who's kind of going to be that last guy. So you're not going to hear, oh, well, we'll just run quarters. We'll be fine. We'll kind of, that's how we'll mitigate it. No, you're not going to hear the NFL. You're going to end up getting some sort of post-close coverage, but you're not going to bail that safety to the middle third. He's going to be more or less kind of like a quarterback spy, double alley player. He can run to both sides. And then you're going to have a layered zone behind it so that if you do get run, we have guys on either shoulder of that quarterback.
Yeah. Too, like you mentioned the spot drop stuff. I mean, I do feel like I've seen a lot more of that, especially against the running quarterbacks. I mean, that goes back to kind of the old school adage of we want vision on the quarterback.
Yes.
Like that's the good thing. Like if he does break contain, like, or you don't got your back towards the quarterback, where if you're playing 3 match, you're playing man to man, those guys go vertical. That pretty much turns into like one of the old like tricks that you used to do in Madden, like early 2000s with Mike Vick. We're just gonna run 4 verticals, and if it's man to man, I'm gonna roll out the pocket and I'm gonna roll.
Yeah.
So I know we went a little bit longer than anticipated, but I still want to give you the chance to promote all of your stuff, like talk a little bit about like some of the stuff that you've done, things where people can find you, and maybe some stuff that you got upcoming that you want to share.
Yeah, so I've been this whole offseason, I've really kind of pivoted due to more focus on the NFL's, primarily NFL defense. I am very niche, so like I do talk about defenses. There are elements of like what an offense is doing and how modern offenses are attacking that. But you can find everything that you need at matchquarters.com. Make sure you subscribe to it. Like if you're a defensive nerd or you want to learn about defense, then the thing that I try and do is make it digestible. For people. I'm a teacher by trade, and so that's what I'm trying to do, is just teach defense. This is not playbook heavy. I'm not trying to teach you the Dick LeBeau playbook. I'm not trying to go through that with a bunch of jargon. You can find too, like you mentioned, a couple of my books. You can find those on Amazon. Again, all these links you can find at matchquarters.com. I'm trying to do a little bit more video content as well, just because I feel like I like doing it, and so trying to do a little bit more of that stuff too. All on matchquarters.com. I do usually post daily clips on Twitter as well and on other social media, so make sure to follow along.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Like you mentioned, the digestible content, man. Like I can't stress that enough, because I know that's something that I routinely like try to like continually get better at, is making sure that like I want to talk like detailed X's and O's and schematic stuff, but doing so in an entertaining but also a digestible manner is really important, because like you talk about the niche, you're talking about a really specific audience that's really into a lot of this stuff. But I'm telling you guys, like if y'all want to learn more about like the defensive side of the ball, there's nowhere else that you need to go. Like consistently, I find myself, if I run into questions, like Cody's been a really good resource for me, but I'm constantly checking out his Match Quarter site, his Substack, in terms of like, all right, I need to know about this coverage or like how this defense plays. I'll instantly go search that stuff and read up. It's heaven, man. Like it's one of the best. It's one of the best resources out there for sure. I encourage you guys to check that out. But we ran a little bit long, so we're going to skate out of here. But I appreciate you guys for following along. Make sure you all go support Cody's stuff on the way out. Just make sure that you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Drop me a comment to let me know what you guys think, and enjoy the rest of your week. Peace and love.